In recent days, Yazidi women, men, and children have fled for their lives. And I believe the United States of America cannot turn a blind eye. We can act carefully and responsibly to prevent a potential act of genocide.
That was President Obama in August 2014 talking about a tragedy that was then unfolding in northern Iraq as ISIS attacked the Yezidis, a religious minority there. The Yezidis had sought safety from the terrorists at the top of a mountain, Mount Sinjar, but ISIS surrounded the mountain and left the Yazidis with two choices, as Obama explained: descend the mountain and be slaughtered, or stay and slowly die of thirst and hunger. At the same time, one of the world's largest concrete manufacturers, a French company called Lafarge, was paying ISIS so that it could continue to operate a cement plant in the area that ISIS had seized. These two events collided in a suit brought last year by the U.S. Department of Justice, which ended in Lafarge pleading guilty and paying nearly $800 million in fines. This week, a landmark civil lawsuit was filed seeking restitution from Lafarge for the Yazidi victims of ISIS crimes. Joining me now for an exclusive interview are international human rights lawyer Amal Clooney, who is one of the lead lawyers on the suit, as well as the lead plaintiff, a Yazidi woman and Nobel Peace Prize recipient named Nadia Murad. She is the author of The Last Girl, My Story of Captivity and My Fight Against the Islamic State. I'm pleased to welcome both of you back to the show. It is such a pleasure to see you, but there's such an important case. Just give us, as you're the lawyer, give us the facts of the case. What did Lafarge actually do?
So thank you, Fareed, for having us. The facts of this case are really shocking. So as you said, just when the genocide against the Yazidis was beginning in Iraq that ISIS committed, this company that had already been funding ISIS for a year actually ramped up its support for ISIS. And, you know, the invasion began on the 3rd of August, 2014. Just days later, Lafarge was negotiating a new deal with ISIS, not just to keep the factory going, but to actually split its profits, give them a share of the cake, as they put it. They were negotiating the terms of this deal on the 15th of August, when ISIS attacked Nadia's village, when 6 of her brothers were executed, and when her mother was executed. They actually agreed, this cement company, one of the largest in the world, agreed to giving ISIS better terms in this profit-sharing arrangement that they were entering into, ultimately agreeing to give ISIS 10% of its cement and 25% of the value of its raw materials. I mean, they are watching these images unfolding in front of them. The factory that Lafarge was operating through its subsidiary in Syria was just 52 miles away from Raqqa, which was the center of the slave trade that the Yazidis became subjected to, the women and young girls. In the groundbreaking prosecution that the Department of Justice brought against this company, the company admitted that it gave almost $6 million to ISIS and to a related group, the al-Nusra Front. They admit that they agreed to provide cement, which reportedly was used by ISIS to build tunnels in which Western hostages and Yazidis were held and tortured. So, you know, this is an absolutely shocking set of circumstances. We commend the Department of Justice for criminally prosecuting this company in what was the first ever prosecution under a statute that allows prosecutors to go after companies that provide material support and conspire with terrorist groups. But the prosecution resulted in this huge fine, as you say, $750 million. None of that money has gone to the victims, not $1. So the Attorney General has the discretion to redirect some of those funds to the victims, and we hope that he will do so. We've made a request for that. But we've also filed this lawsuit in the Eastern District of New York, seeking on behalf of Nadia as our lead plaintiff, but also over 400 other Yazidi Americans to get compensation from Lafarge for assisting in terrorist violence.
Nadia, what would you do with the money? Let us assume the Attorney General does direct some, but let's assume the suit is successful. What are the needs of the people who have been affected so terribly by ISIS?
You know, having this company, like holding them accountable and having them compensate those who have suffered because of their support to ISIS, it's really important. So many of these people in the U.S., Yezidis, they have family members still. Some of them have family members in captivity. Some have family members who've returned back to their homeland, but they struggle to rebuild their lives. And I'm hoping that this will help them, to their family members, to rebuild their lives, but also to be able to go back, because it's been almost 10 years and more than 200,000 Yezidis are still displaced inside their own country in Iraq. They can't afford to go back and rebuild their houses.
Amal, this was quite an effort, as you've pointed, the size of the suit, but also the complexity. You went to Nebraska to find plaintiffs for this suit. Tell us about that.
That's right. So the plaintiffs are all U.S. citizens, and we sort of had worked out the legal theory of the case. We, of course, were tracking what was happening in the criminal proceedings, and we were ready to go with the case. We just needed to find our clients and plaintiffs, and we discovered that there's a big community of Yazidis in Nebraska. So, I think Yazidis know, of course, that I've been working with this community on multiple accountability efforts for years now. We didn't tell them what it was about, but we said, can you please gather in this hall at this time? This lawyer's coming to Lincoln. And I started to explain what was possible. This is the first meaningful chance for compensation for these victims of ISIS. More and more people started coming and filling the hall, and I extended the trip. And it's amazing to see, sort of laid out in this court document, 427 names, and we expect that more people will come forward as well.
Next up, how did Nadia manage to go from a victim of ISIS terror to a powerful figure holding the group's supporters to account? More from Nadia Murad and Amal Clooney when we come back. And we are back with human rights lawyer Amal Clooney, a lead lawyer on a new case against a French company for aiding and abetting ISIS. Joining her is the lead plaintiff in the case, Nadia Murad. Nadia, when you think about all the challenges you have had, I mean, you have managed to, you were sold into the sex trade by ISIS, and now look at you, obviously you've won the Nobel Prize, but you're also a student at American University. I think about the first time I met you, you could barely speak a word of English. You're now writing papers in sociology in English. What do you think made it possible for you to have the kind of grit and determination to move out of the shadows of this tragedy into the kind of work you're doing now?
I've decided to share my story at the very beginning when I survived, because I saw the evil of ISIS, and it was important for the world to, to remind the world about the horrific crimes ISIS committed against Yezidis, and in order to prevent this from happening again, I had to share my story, and I felt responsible because I was lucky enough to survive, but my nieces who were with me were later killed by ISIS in captivity, and they didn't make it. And when you make it and when you survive, you just feel this burden and the guilt of going out there and sharing your story. And later to learn that, such corporations directly supported ISIS in their crimes, war crimes, it was just sickening and unbearable.
To me, it's
I think that's one of the sort of really shocking features of this whole sort of episode, is that, neither the armed groups nor their financiers expect to face accountability, and you can see that by just how brazen they are. So literally, ISIS wrote down its plan for genocide. It explained why, under its warped interpretation of Islam, it was okay to rape Yazidis and try to destroy Yazidis. And equally, this company initially was brazen in its support. And, we've looked at all these documents where you see there's an agreement and it's on ISIS letterhead and it has the name of the company on it. You know, one of the documents is literally signed by the emir of the Investment Office of Islamic State. They weren't even trying to cover their tracks initially, but yeah, I mean, the terrorists are brazen and the financiers are brazen, and they will continue to do so long as they're not being punished.
What's so interesting about that is what both of you are trying to do is we forget, right? I mean, what happened with ISIS was horrendous, and the world rose up in kind of horror. But then once it was defeated militarily on the battlefield, it passes. And what you're trying to do is to remind people. What you're trying to do is hold people accountable. How hard is that? When you go and talk to people in governments, do you find it's a hard sell to remind them of the things that they had been so repulsed by just a few years ago?
I think that's what Mal and I will always talk about it. You know, after ISIS was defeated, the pain and the trauma was not gone. But, you know, it was there. And, you know, soon after that, we saw a news cycle just, you know, moving on and going to another story and covering another story. But it is, you know, we still have more than 2,000 Yazidi women and children missing in captivity. So far, we have covered more than 83 mass graves. And it's been almost, you know, 10 years. I have been able to only bury 2 of my brothers. I have my mother and 4 brothers, 2 nieces, 11 cousins, 1 nephew. They all were killed. And some of them are now in a building in Baghdad, have not been, you know, they've been exhumed, but have not been identified. And there is no closure without a proper burial for those families.
Amal, what do you think are the implications for all this? You know that there is this conversation now about sexual war crimes committed by Hamas. There are things going on in the world now. When you look at that with all this knowledge, what are the lessons?
You know, I think the lesson is it costs money to commit crimes like this and crimes at this scale. And we have to continue to pursue justice in, you know, every forum. So we, you know, as lawyers, you know, we're not governments. We can't, unfortunately, prevent these atrocities. But at least after they happen, we can work with survivors and build cases, you know, anything that can move the needle towards accountability and away from impunity, meaning perpetrators have to face prosecution and victims have to be able to get some assistance in rebuilding their lives. They deserve compensation at the very least, and I think that cuts across the board for you know, victims of sexual violence, whether it's Sudan or victims of international crimes taking place now in the Middle East.
Thank you both. This is such important work you're doing. Amal, Nadia, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much, Fareed.